Well, how do you turn that into a bogie now?
First of all, you have to separate the pieces. Quite a lot of the pieces have to be bent as well. Then you solder them together.
Now, what's the advantage of making a bogie like that? Compare that with the conventional system.
Well, here is a conventional bogie, made of rather heavy castings, not a lot of detail, and unsprung. Now, here's one of these made up. Not only has it got rather better detail, but also it's sprung.
Well, Stuart, I've got just the right train waiting to try this out, so let's mount a carriage on a set of these bogies and give the springing a test run.
Here's another new idea, like my radio-controlled diesel-electric locomotive, which gives you a chance of having your controls in your hand and not in the cab. This is a steam locomotive, a Battle of Britain-class loco built by Dick Moger, and that is radio-controlled. It's fired by gas because nobody has produced radio-controlled coal yet.
But this is a very sophisticated design. There is an electronic water gauge. It shows green to indicate that the water level in the boiler is okay.
All I have to do is open the regulator, and away she goes. Well, come on then.
And there, floating beautifully on Stuart's new bogies, goes the end carriage.
That locomotive by Dick Moger shows that technical development is still possible with the old steam train, which became first a feasible proposition about 150 years ago. In 1829 precisely, when George Stephenson's rocket took the laurels at the Rainhill trials.
This 5-inch gauge model was built by Robert Markham from the original drawings.
Rocket was an amazing technical triumph of its time, because if you care to think of it, one of the competitors at Rainhill trial was called the Cycloped and was driven by a horse on a treadmill.
Rocket reached a maximum speed of 24 miles an hour, and an intriguing thought for people who object to pollution, it consumed its own smoke by a forced air blast up the stack.
The main problem of making small-scale models of old locos is that everything is so small. Now, certain things like the friction of the pistons in the cylinders and the behavior of water and steam in pipes simply won't scale down. And there's nobody better than Dennis Wilkinson of Reading to solve these problems. Have a look at his Great Northern Atlantic here. Here is the brake valve in the cab. It's a steam brake, and it works absolutely perfectly. And it's the right size. And here's the regulator. It's a scale size regulator, exactly the same size in the loco, and it does its job just as it ought to. Now, the next model in this Museum of Railway History is Vic Doswell's French PLM loco. This engine was built in the 1870s and ran from Paris through Lyon to the Mediterranean, hence the word PLM. The French railway engineers were always very meticulous about their engine design, very forward-going, and they even kitted out their engine drivers and firemen with gas masks so that they wouldn't suffocate through the tunnels. But they let them down their ideas when they streamlined the PLM engines because simply they weren't going fast enough. A French railway engineer was also responsible for the nuttiest railway design ever in the 1880s in Ireland. It went by the name of Listowel and Ballybunion monorail. I kid you not. It ran through the country, had 10 miles of track and no level crossings. It had bridges, drawbridges, which opened like a bascule, like the Tower Bridge, and closed again when the train had gone. The real problem was one of balance. If 5 Irishmen wanted to travel, they had to balance the 2 fat ones on one side with the 3 thin ones the other side. I wonder whether they did with a load of pigs. The line finally expired in 1924, just as 20 years of experiment came to an end with another form of transport, the biplane.
Colonel S.F. Cody's machine won the Michelin Cup for the longest, fastest flight in 1910. These models are made by Tim Elsmore, who's been in aviation since the early 20s. This biplane was originally designed by Geoffrey de Havilland. It flew tail first, driven by the pusher propeller at the back, and was called the canard, French for duck or spoof. Ducks can't fly tail first, so I think spoof is the better translation. Many of these planes had advanced design. This is one of Horace Short's experiments with multi-engined aircraft. The counter-rotating propellers cut down the tendency of the machine to swing to one side. So nothing could be more misleading than the affectionate nickname they went by of string bags.
Just look at her. Isn't she a thing of delicacy and beauty? This type of thing is only preserved for very specialized kinds of aircraft today.
But a little more robustness is needed for real flying, like this version of a 1916 Mannock fighter. And here comes the trickiest craft of all to handle, that Bell Jet Ranger helicopter I flew earlier on. The controllers of these aircraft are two of the country's greatest experts on radio-controlled flying. Dave Boddington, who owns the plane, supplies them for stunt flying sequences in films. David Neiman does the same with his helicopters.
A full-scale helicopter, you have some direct feedback from the machine because you're actually in it, apart from the fact that you have instruments and a horizon to watch, and you've got a much better feel for the machine. The model helicopter is at a distance, and you've got to see some definite movement before you can react to it. You can liken it to the feel of flying a model helicopter to balancing a pole in your upturned palm, one in each hand. And when the model is coming towards you, all the controls being reversed, you can, if you move your hands across the front of yourself so that your right hand is now on the left-hand side of your body, it's like performing the same balancing act in that sort of configuration, which takes a lot of getting used to.
I think everybody would agree that a fixed wing, both model and full size, are easier to fly than rotary wing aircraft. But nevertheless, there are very real challenges. And whereas Dave Neiman has gone on to helicopters, I'm still at the moment finding plenty of challenges to keep me going with the fixed wing aircraft.
Well, what is it that you can do that he can't do?
There are one or two things that I can do that he certainly can't. Now, how about a loop, Dave? Can you do a loop?
Well, up until recently that was a bit fraught, but we've got some quite sophisticated models now that are capable of loops.
I know you can go backwards, which certainly with a fixed wing we can't, but I suppose one thing that you can't do yet, and that is to go inverted, and we can do that.
Not for very long. We can go inverted. We are actually rolling helicopters now, and they are inverted, but not for very long. That would be a little bit too much to ask.
I think helicopters need just a little bit more concentration. And I think sometimes if you could have a look at your face when you're flying it, you'd see the concentration written all over it.
I agree. Concentration is the major part of it, but it comes with practice. The skills of flying helicopters are something you learn slowly.
Dave Boddington, how do you go about making a model look real?
There's lots of tricks of the trade. We have to get the atmosphere of the aeroplane right. We have to make sure that the texture of the covering of the model is right. If it's an early type aircraft, they were covered with linen, and so we cover them in a lightweight nylon, and this gives the right sort of texture. We then find that it is very necessary to really dirty these aircraft up, to accentuate this, to make it more than perhaps would appear on the real aircraft. This is the important thing, to really create the atmosphere of the full-size aircraft so that when people see it on the screen, they honestly don't know whether it is a model or the full-size thing.
You flew the models for the series Wings, didn't you?
Oh yes, we had a great deal of fun doing that. And there, certainly with the first series of Wings, we were all learning. One sequence, for instance, where we really tried to create the atmosphere well, not just with the aircraft, but with ack guns and the lot. It's a sequence where there's a very young, raw recruit pilot come to the Western Front, and he's flying with an experienced pilot, Charles Galian, who's leading him. He disobeys instructions and goes in to try to find this German gun, with, I'm afraid, dire results.
The man who operated this anti-aircraft gun and incidentally shot down one of our own pilots is Michael John Harris of the BBC Special Effects Department. Mike, what's the difference between people like yourself and model makers like myself?
Well, I think the main difference is that for me, model making is not an end in itself. It's a means to another end, the achieving of reality, real effects, conviction in filming.
And how do you go about fitting a model into a situation?
Well, circumstances alter cases, but basically the principle is that you build a bit of model landscape to the scale of any particular model you want to use, and then merge that model landscape into the existing landscape about us. And if you've got the right scale, the right circumstances, textures, lighting, it all works.
Now, I have a surprise for you. I have here Gerald Wingrove's magnificent scale model of a Bentley. It's absolutely perfect.
Oh, it's the most beautiful model, this. Oh,
Look
it's
at the
beautiful.
toolkit inside the door, where you expect to see
Yes.
it. Look at the actual
The
finished...
stone guards.
Yes, stone guards, the compressor,
Supercharger.
supercharger. Even the sleeving on the stuff is correct.
Yes.
You see, that's the sort of thing I would have liked to have owned.
Well, it looks as though it should go in front of your house, Bob, on a drive.
But of course I haven't got a drive.
Well, perhaps we'll make one for you.
Well, Mike, that's very good. I suppose it would have made your task easier if I handed you a larger model, but it really looks as if there's a road there.